Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental, maybe even a bit ambitious. We're drilling down into the math, the very bedrock of security, to see how that basic unit of information, the bit, actually sets the absolute limit on secrecy.
It's a fascinating path, really. It takes us from, pure information theory right into the thick of modern cyber strategy. We talk a lot about the latest hacks, the firewalls, the tech, but underneath it all, there's this theoretical limit.
So our mission today is to get a handle on that limit, what secrecy can be, based on things like entropy and randomness, and then explore this weird paradox of today's world, this absolute flood of digital information. How does it make data harder to find, yet somehow much riskier to have?
Exactly. We'll be looking at sources that define things pretty rigorously, like pseudo-random bit generators,
Mm-hmm.
but also connecting that to real-world stuff, like cyber espionage tactics and just the sheer headache of managing massive amounts of data.
Okay, so where do we start? You mentioned a paradox right at the beginning, perfect secrecy.
Ugh. Yes, the holy grail, you could say. The one-time pad. It's theoretically perfect, unbreakable, even with infinite computing power.
Unbreakable sounds pretty good.
It is. But the conditions, they're tough.
Yeah.
Brutal, really. One, the key has to be truly perfectly random, like genuinely unpredictable. Two, the key has to be at least as long as the message itself. And three, you use that key exactly once, never again.
As long as the message. So if I have a gigabyte file.
You need a gigabyte key, a truly random gigabyte key that you use only for this message.
Okay, I see the problem. How do you securely get that gigabyte key to the recipient beforehand?
Precisely. That's the killer. You haven't solved the secrecy problem. You've just shifted it. Now you have this massive key distribution problem. It's completely impractical for, everyday communication, large files, dynamic situations. Just doesn't scale.
So perfect information theoretic security exists, but it's basically unusable for most things.
Right. And that impracticality forced the entire field of cryptography to pivot. We had to move away from, is this mathematically impossible to break, towards, is this computationally infeasible to break? Like, can someone realistically break this in, say, the next 50 or 100 years with the best computers imaginable?
So modern security is built on difficulty, not impossibility.
Exactly. We assume it's mathematically possible to break modern ciphers, like AES. But the time, the resources, the sheer computational power needed, it's designed to be astronomical, far beyond any adversary's reach.
Hopefully. And you said this whole structure rests on something fragile.
It rests entirely on having a reliable source of true, unpredictable randomness. That's the bedrock beneath the computational hardness. Without good randomness, the math doesn't matter.
Okay, let's dig into that randomness requirement because, computers are deterministic machines, right? Aren't most random numbers we use?
Yeah.
Well, not actually random.
That's the critical point. They're pseudo-random.
Yeah.
A pseudo-random bit generator, a PRBG, it's just an algorithm, a recipe. It starts with the small piece of genuine randomness that's the seed. Maybe 128 bits, 256 bits, something like that.
A tiny amount.
Tiny compared to the output, yeah. The PRBG takes that seed, runs it through its deterministic steps, and spits out a huge sequence of bits, millions, billions maybe. And this long sequence looks random. It passes statistical tests for randomness. But if you know the algorithm and you know that initial seed,
You can predict the entire output sequence.
every single bit, it's not random at all in that sense.
That feels like a built-in weakness we're just kind of accepting.
It's what the sources call the seed problem. It's the theoretical constraint. Think about it. If your seed is kilobits long, there are only 2 killer possible seeds.
Okay.
So the generator can only ever produce 2 kiloballer different output sequences. But the total number of possible sequences of length, $2. It's vastly bigger than $1, which it always is.
Then the generator can only produce a tiny, tiny fraction of all possible random-looking sequences.
An infinitesimally small fraction. It's like having a map with trillions of possible roads. But your generator, because of the small seed, can only ever draw a few million of those roads. The apparent randomness comes from stretching that small initial secret, the seed, in a very complex way.
So the security of the whole thing just collapses if the seed is guessed or compromised.
Absolutely. Everything hinges on the quality, the true randomness and the secrecy of that initial seed.
Which brings us back to, where do we get this true randomness, this entropy? If computers can't make it, where does it come from?
We have to harvest it from the physical world, from processes that are inherently unpredictable. There are sort of 2 main categories. First, you can look at external inputs, things related to chaotic system behavior.
Like what?
Timing variations. the tiny delays between network packet arrivals, or the time it takes for a hard drive head to seek a track. Even human input, the precise timing of your keystrokes, the little jitters in your mouse movements.
So measuring the unpredictability of the outside world, including us.
Yeah. Now, these sources are often messy. They might not be perfectly uniform, maybe you type certain keys faster than others, but if you collect enough data, a large enough volume, you can distill enough unpredictability, enough entropy from it.
But you said there's a preferred method.
Right. The gold standard is tapping into fundamental physical phenomena, things governed by quantum mechanics or thermodynamics, thermal noise in a resistor, the shot noise from electrons flowing in a semiconductor, even the timing of radioactive decay. These are inherently stochastic at a deep physical level.
I think I read Intel actually builds hardware for this into their chips.
They do. They have on-chip digital random number generators, PRNGs, that use these kinds of physical processes to generate a stream of truly unpredictable bits right there on the silicon. That's considered a very strong source.
Okay, so we collect this raw, unpredictable data, this high entropy stuff. Is it ready to use as a seed right away?
Usually not. It needs processing. It's typically a two-step dance. Step one is collection. Gather lots of this high entropy data. Entropy here is just the measure of its unpredictability. Step two is conditioning. That raw data might be biased, maybe slightly more ones than zeros, or certain patterns might appear more often.
So you clean it up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You run it through conditioning functions or algorithms. These are like statistical filters. They aim to remove biases and correlations to produce an output stream where the bits are as close to independent and uniformly distributed half ones, half zeros as possible. Think of it like laundering the randomness to make it clean and usable.
You mentioned statistical tests earlier. You pass the raw entropy through conditioning. It passes statistical tests for randomness. But you said that's still not enough for cryptographic security. Why not?
This is a really crucial point. Statistical randomness is necessary, but absolutely not sufficient. An attacker trying to break your encryption isn't just checking if the output looks random. They might know the PRBG algorithm you used. Often these are public standardized algorithms.
Yes.
Their goal isn't to guess the entire long random sequence. Their goal is to figure out the much, much smaller seed. If they can find the seed, they can regenerate the whole sequence. So cryptographic security relies on the PRNG algorithm itself being strong, meaning even if you know the algorithm and see the output, it should be computationally infeasible to work backward and find the seed.
It's about the difficulty of reversing the process.
Yes. We rely on using that small amount of high-quality true entropy as a seed for a cryptographically secure PRNG, something like SHA-20 or algorithms based on hash functions that stretches it into a long sequence that resists being reversed.
And this need for algorithms that are hard to reverse. That leads us straight into the core idea behind modern ciphers, right? Computational hardness.
It's the foundation. The whole enterprise shifted because perfect secrecy was impractical. So we rely on mathematical problems that are believed to be incredibly hard to solve. And central to this is the idea, maybe even the hope, that one-way functions exist.
Okay, unpack that. One-way functions.
Think of a function, a mathematical operation. A one-way function is easy to compute in one direction, the forward direction. But it's extremely difficult, computationally infeasible, to compute in the reverse direction, to invert it, unless you have some secret piece of information like a private key.
Can you give us the classic example?
The most famous one is factoring large numbers. This is the basis for RSA encryption, which used to be everywhere, still is in many places. To generate an RSA key, you pick two huge prime numbers and multiply them together. That multiplication. Super easy, even for massive numbers. That's the forward direction.
Okay.
But the reverse, taking the result, that big composite number, and finding the two original prime factors, that is believed to be incredibly hard for large enough numbers. That's the hard problem RSA relies on.
So the security rests on the difficulty of factoring.
Yes. And other systems use different hard problems. Elliptic curve cryptography, which is more common now for many things, uses hard problems related to discrete logarithms on elliptic curves. It's all about finding mathematical operations that are easy one way and brutally hard the other.
But hard is relative, isn't it? Computers get faster. Algorithms get smarter.
Absolutely. It's a constant arms race. The computational hardness we rely on is not static. Our sources really highlight this with the history of factoring algorithms. We used to rely on algorithms like the quadratic sieve. People thought factoring, say, a 512-bit number was safe for a long time.
And then?
Then came the general number field sieve, the GNFS, and it turned out to be much, much more efficient than early estimates predicted. The impact was Dramatic.
How dramatic.
Staggering, really. For a 512-bit number, the GNFS is more than 10 times faster than the quadratic sieve. 10 times. What that means is security assumptions that seemed safe just 15 or 20 years ago, based on 512-bit keys, they completely evaporated.
So data encrypted back then with those keys might be vulnerable now.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
If someone recorded that encrypted traffic, the cost to factor those keys dropped from nation-state level maybe down to well-funded academic project, or potentially even less now.
Wow, so this explains the constant push for longer key sizes.
Exactly. It's a direct reaction to Moore's law and, just as importantly, algorithmic breakthroughs like GNFS. We had to move from 512 bits to 1024, then 2048 bits became the standard for RSA, and even that's being pushed higher or replaced by elliptic curves, which offers similar security with smaller keys. You're constantly trying to stay ahead, ensuring the computational difficulty remains high enough to deter attackers for the foreseeable future.
Okay, so we have this foundation, true randomness, stretched by computationally hard math problems. Now, how does this play out in real-world systems? Let's talk about applying this, maybe starting with the difference between just keeping something secret and actually trusting where it came from.
That's a crucial distinction. Encryption provides secrecy or confidentiality, making sure only the right person can read the message. But then there's authentication and integrity. Authentication is proving who sent the message. Integrity is proving it wasn't tampered with along the way.
And standard encryption, especially symmetric encryption, where both sides have the same key, doesn't automatically give you strong authentication, right?
Not an approvable way, no.
Uh.
If Alice and Bob share a secret key, K, and Bob gets a message encrypted with K, he knows it came from someone who has K.
Which could be Alice, or it could be Bob himself.
Exactly. Bob can't take that encrypted message to a third party, say Trent the judge, and prove Alice sent it. Because Bob also has the key, he could have created the message himself. This means symmetric crypto lacks non-repudiation. Alice can later deny sending the message, and Bob can't mathematically prove she did.
So if simple encryption doesn't give us that proof of origin, what does? What tool handles that?
We use message authentication codes, or MCs. These are specifically designed for integrity and authenticity. MAC is basically a small tag calculated from the message and the shared secret key. The sender calculates the tag, sends it with a message. The receiver recalculates the tag using the same key and the received message. If the tags match, the receiver is confident it came from the key holder and wasn't altered.
And often this involves hash functions. I hear hash-anac or HMA mentioned a lot.
Yes, hashing is very common here.
Yeah.
A cryptographic hash function takes an input message of any size and produces a fixed size, unique-looking output, the hash digest. The idea in hash-anac is roughly you hash the message first, then you compute the MAC on that hash using the secret key.
But you have to be careful how you combine the key and the message with the hash function, especially older ones.
Oh, absolutely. This is a classic pitfall. Many widely used hash functions, like MD5, which is broken anyway, and SHA-1, also deprecated, and even parts of the SHA-2 family, are built using something called the Merkle-Damgård construction. And this construction has a vulnerability known as a length extension attack.
Length extension? What's that?
It means if you calculate a hash naively, like just H key message, an attacker who sees the message and the resulting hash value.
But doesn't know the key.
Right. Without knowing the key, they can sometimes figure out the hash of a longer message, like H key message attacker's extra data. They can append data and calculate the valid hash for the extended message without ever learning the original key.
Because the internal state of the hash function kind of leaks through?
Essentially, yes. The structure allows this extension. That's why standardized MAC constructions like HMAC were developed. They use the hash function in a specific way, hashing the key, then hashing the message with the hash key, etc., that prevents this length extension attack. It's also a major reason why SHA-3 was developed with a completely different internal structure, the sponge construction, which isn't vulnerable to these attacks. It shows how protocol design has to evolve to cover weaknesses in the underlying cryptographic primitives.
Okay, that makes sense. Moving from proving identity to something even more, well, exotic. Zero-knowledge proofs, ZKPs. This sounds like proving, a secret without revealing the secret itself.
It sounds like magic, doesn't it? But it's solid mathematics. The goal is exactly that. Alice wants to convince Victor that she knows some secret information, the witness, without revealing anything about the secret itself to Victor.
How on earth does that work? Can you give an analogy?
The classic one is the Alibaba cave. Imagine a cave with a single entrance that splits into two paths, left and right. which loop around and meet at a magic door deep inside. Only knowing the secret word opens the door.
Hmm.
Alice wants to prove to Victor she knows the word. She goes into the cave alone. Victor waits outside, then randomly shouts either come out the left path or come out the right path.
Okay.
If Alice doesn't know the word, she can only come out the path she originally entered. She'd be caught half the time if Victor guesses the other path. But if Alice does know the word, she can go in one path, use the word to open the magic door, cross over, and emerge from whichever path Victor called out.
Ah, so if she succeeds many times in a row, Victor becomes convinced she must know the word, because she couldn't just be guessing the right path every time.
Exactly. And critically, Victor never learns the secret word itself. He only sees Alice emerging from the correct path. She uses randomness, her initial path choice, Victor's challenge, combined with her knowledge of the secret to prove possession without revelation.
That's clever. Are there different strengths of these proofs?
Yes, the theoretical guarantees vary. Our sources mention a few key types. Perfect ZKPs are the strongest. A theoretical simulator can generate fake proof transcripts that are mathematically identical in distribution to real proofs, absolutely zero information leaks. Computational ZKPs are more common in practice. The fake transcripts generated by a simulator are computationally indistinguishable from real ones. An attacker with realistic computing power can't tell the difference. And then there's no-use ZKPs, a slightly weaker guarantee, saying the verifier won't learn any useful polynomial amount of information, even if perfect simulation isn't possible.
So identical versus indistinguishable is the key difference between perfect theory and practical security. Got it. Now let's shift back to the workhorses, the algorithms we use every day for encryption, like block ciphers.
Right? Like AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard. These operate on fixed-size chunks of data, say 128 bits at a time. They use multiple rounds of complex operations, substitutions, permutations, mixing things up thoroughly. The algorithms themselves, like AES, are incredibly well vetted and considered very secure. But their security in practice depends entirely on how you use them.
The mode of operation.
Exactly. Using a strong cipher in a weak mode can completely undermine the security. FIPS Pub 81 is the standard that defined many of these modes.
And the simplest mode, electronic codebook, ECB, is famously bad.
Oh, ECB is terrible for most uses, yet it persists because it's simple. It encrypts each block of plaintext completely independently. The classic example is encrypting an image with ECB. If you have large areas of the same color, those correspond to identical plaintext blocks.
So they encrypt to identical ciphertext blocks.
Right. And the result is that while the colors are scrambled, you can still clearly see the outline of the original image. The shape of the Tux penguin, for instance, is a famous demo. It leaks structural information about the plaintext because identical inputs produce identical outputs. An attacker sees patterns, repetitions.
Very bad. So what's the fix? Something like cipher blockchaining, CBC?
CBC is a huge improvement. Before encrypting the current plaintext block, you XOR it with the previous ciphertext block. This introduces dependency. Now, even if you have two identical plaintext blocks, they will encrypt to completely different ciphertext blocks as long as the blocks preceding them were different. It breaks up those patterns ECB reveals.
Makes sense. Adds that necessary linkage. You mentioned design cleverness earlier. The Feistel structure used in DES, the predecessor to AES, is another example.
Ah, the Feistel network. It's a really elegant piece of cryptographic design. It works by splitting the data block into two halves, say left and right. In each round, you apply a complex and potentially non-invertible round function, f to one half, say the right half, and then XOR the output of that function onto the other half, the left half. Then you swap the halves for the next round.
Okay, sounds like a structured way to mix things up. What's the clever part?
The decryption. To decrypt, you use the exact same structure, but you apply the round keys derived from the main key in the reverse order. Because of the XOR operation and the swapping, the process naturally unwinds itself. Crucially, the round function f itself doesn't need to be invertible.
Oh, that seems like a big deal.
It's huge for designers. It means they can create really complex, nonlinear round functions f that provide strong confusion and diffusion properties, making the cipher secure without worrying about the mathematical difficulty of finding an inverse for f. The structure handles the decryption automatically. It simplifies building strong ciphers.
Very neat. Okay, so we have strong ciphers, good modes of operation. But how do two parties actually establish a secure connection and agree on a key to use in the first place, especially over an insecure network like the internet?
That's where key distribution and session management protocols come in. You need a secure way to authenticate each other and agree on a temporary shared session key for that specific conversation.
And Kubernetes is a classic example of managing this in, say, a corporate network.
Kerberos is a perfect illustration of managing secure, controlled information flow for authentication. It uses a trusted third party, the Key Distribution Center, KDC.
How does it avoid sending secret keys in the clear?
When a client wants to talk to a server, it first asks the KDC for a ticket for that server. The KDC generates a fresh random session key. It then creates a ticket containing the client's identity, the server's identity, a timestamp, and this new session key. Here's the key part. The KDC encrypts this entire ticket using the server's long-term secret key, which only the server knows.
So the client gets this encrypted blob.
Yes. The KDC also sends the client a copy of the session key, but encrypted using the client's long-term secret key, so the client can decrypt its copy. The client then sends the encrypted ticket, which it can't read itself, to the server.
And the server can read it because it's encrypted with the server's key.
Exactly. The server decrypts the ticket, retrieves the session key, verifies the client ID and timestamp, and now both the client and server share that fresh session key. They can use it for secure communication. The critical point is the controlled flow. The session key is protected during transit, encrypted differently for client and server. The client carries the ticket but can't forge it or read its sensitive parts meant for the server. It limits exposure.
All right, we've built up from bits and randomness to keys and protocols, but now we hit the modern reality, just the sheer, overwhelming volume of data, the digital noise.
It's the great paradox, isn't it? We spent decades building systems for perfect connectivity, for convenience, something like 127 new devices connect to the internet every second. And what we inadvertently created is, as one source put it, the world's largest attack surface.
So the explosion of data isn't just a storage problem, it's a fundamental security problem.
It's an exponential risk multiplier. The more data you collect and store, personal data, financial data, operational data from critical infrastructure, intellectual property, the greater the potential damage when, inevitably, a breach occurs.
And we've seen breaches scale up massively. It's not just losing a few credit cards anymore.
No, think about the OPM breach, the Office of Personnel Management. Highly sensitive background investigation data from millions of U.S. federal employees and contractors compromised, or SolarWinds malicious code pushed out through a software update to potentially 30,000 organizations worldwide. When you centralize or accumulate vast data sets, the impact of a single point of failure becomes catastrophic. Big data equals big risk.
And a lot of this data accumulation isn't just happening by accident. It's driven by specific economic models. You mentioned surveillance capitalism.
Right. This model's core aim is essentially to translate raw human experience into quantifiable data points. This behavioral surplus, as Shoshana Zuboff calls it, is often collected without deep awareness or meaningful consent from the individual. It's gathered through apps, websites, smart devices, everywhere. And it's used to predict and influence behavior, primarily for commercial gain.
Creating a huge imbalance of knowledge.
A profound asymmetry of knowledge and power. These systems are often designed like a one-way mirror. The collectors see and analyze everything, while the person generating the data sees very little of how it's used. It fundamentally changes the power dynamic.
And even seemingly mundane data collection, like from infrastructure, plays into this.
Absolutely. Take smart meters for electricity. They're great for grid efficiency, collecting energy usage data maybe every 15 minutes. But that granular data isn't just about kilowatts. It reveals patterns of life. When you wake up, when you leave for work, when you use certain appliances, if you're home or away, it's highly personal behavioral data.
So benign utility data becomes potential surveillance data.
Yes. Accumulated and analyzed, it paints an intimate picture. That flow of seemingly innocuous data becomes a privacy risk and potentially an intelligence target for various actors.
Speaking of actors, let's look at nation-states. How does this data flood affect their cyber strategies? Are they focused more on stealing data or causing actual physical damage?
Well, looking at the trends, particularly from around 2000 to 2014, the data suggests that the big increase in state-sponsored cyber incidents correlates mostly with espionage stealing information and disruption, temporarily messing things up. The most feared type, malicious degradation, meaning causing lasting physical damage or destruction. That seems to be comparatively rarer.
Why is that? If states have the capability to, say, take down a power grid, why don't we see it happen more often?
There seems to be a significant strategic constraint, often called the use it and lose it dynamic. To pull off a really damaging degradation attack, like Stuxnet targeting centrifuges or something similar, requires immense preparation. You need deep, persistent access to the target network. You need to map it out, understand the control systems. That takes time, resources, and involves ongoing espionage.
Okay, so you need to be inside first.
Right. But the moment you launch that big destructive attack, you burn your access. You reveal your tools, your methods, your presence. The victim knows they've been hit. They'll patch the vulnerabilities, hunt for other implants. You lose that valuable long-term intelligence vantage point.
Ah, so there's a trade-off. Is the long-term value of spying worth more than the short-term impact of an attack?
It often seems to be yes. States have to constantly weigh that balance. Do we keep quietly collecting intelligence for years, maybe stealing valuable secrets for economic or military advantage? Or do we go loud, cause damage, but lose that hard-won access?
And different states might make different calculations.
We see that historically. For example, analysis suggests China often prioritized long-term espionage, targeting commercial and academic sectors operations like Titan Rain, the Google Aurora incident focusing on acquiring intellectual property to fuel modernization. They seemed willing to maintain access over causing immediate noisy disruption.
But sometimes states do choose the disruption or destruction path.
Yes, and when they do, it's often quite severe, showing the potential impact. Malware like Shamoon, used against the Saudi oil industry, wasn't just about stealing data. It included components specifically designed to wipe hard drives, overwriting the master boot record to render systems unusable. Pure destruction.
And NotPetya, that was huge.
NotPetya was particularly nasty. It masqueraded as ransomware, but its real purpose appeared to be widespread, indiscriminate destruction. It hit major global companies, logistics firms like Maersk, causing billions in damage. It demonstrated a willingness by some actor, widely attributed to Russia targeting Ukraine initially, to deploy truly damaging cyber weapons, even if the collateral damage was immense.
This really underscores the idea that just encrypting the content of data isn't the whole picture. Controlling the flow seems just as critical, if not more so.
Absolutely. Encryption protects data at rest or in transit. But if you can't control where the data goes, who can access it, and what actions can be performed on it, encryption alone isn't enough. Controlling the flow is vital, especially in critical systems like the power grid or industrial controls. You need architectural solutions.
Like what? How do you enforce flow control in complex networks?
You need robust monitoring and policy enforcement. Systems like SAM's security information and event management tools play a big role here. A SIME can be configured with strict policies about normal communication patterns. For example, this control system in Zone A is allowed to talk to that sensor in Zone B, but it should never talk directly to the corporate email server in Zone D.
And the SIME watches for violations.
Exactly. It monitors network traffic and system logs, looking for deviations from the defined policies. If that controller suddenly tries to connect to the email server, the SIEM flags it as a potential security incident, an indicator of compromise or misconfiguration. It's about detecting abnormal flow.
But for the most sensitive systems you mentioned, nuclear reactors, maybe even detecting violations isn't enough. You need to physically prevent bad flow.
For those highest consequence systems, yes. You implement physical, hardware-based controls on data flow. The most common example is a data diode or a unidirectional network gateway. This is literally a piece of hardware that only allows data to travel in one direction. Fiber optic cables might physically transmit light only one way, for instance.
So you could send sensor readings out from a secure zone, but nothing can flow back in.
Precisely. You might use it to get data from a sensitive control network back to a monitoring center, but there's physically no path for commands or malware to travel back into the critical system from the less secure network. It enforces one-way flow at the physical layer.
That idea of unexpected or hidden flow being the vulnerability reminds me of that classic story from early internet history, the cuckoo's egg.
Oh, Cliff Stoll's book. It's the perfect parable for flow control, even back then. He was an astronomer at Lawrence Berkeley Lab.
And he found a tiny accounting discrepancy, like 75 cents?
Yeah, a tiny anomaly in the computer usage accounting. That tiny, unexpected flow of, well, virtual money led him down a rabbit hole. He discovered a hacker had compromised an unused account. But the crucial part wasn't just that the hacker was in. It was what the hacker was doing at that access.
He wasn't just staying put.
No. He was using the LBL system as a jumping-off point, a pivot, to get into other much more sensitive networks. Military networks, the MILNET. Stoll painstakingly traced the connections. Traffic coming into LBL from eventually traced back to Germany, then hopping from LBL through various nodes across the U.S. to attack military computers. The compromised LBL account was just a conduit, enabling an unauthorized hidden flow of access.
And part of that flow was data out, specifically password files.
That was a key technique. The hacker would find password files on compromised systems, sometimes encrypted, sometimes unfortunately not, and transfer them back across the network to his system in Germany. Why? So he could crack them offline using his own computers without triggering alarms on the target system. The passwords themselves might have been strong, the encryption decent for the time, but the vulnerability was allowing that sensitive file to flow out of the secure environment.
So the failure wasn't just the initial break-in, it was the failure to control where sensitive information could go.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates that controlling the pathways, the flow of both access and data, is as fundamental to security as protecting the content itself. Hashtag outro.
Wow. Okay, so we've gone from the absolute basics, the bit and entropy, all the way to, well, global cyber strategy and the structure of the internet itself.
It really covers a huge span. And I think two core challenges emerge very clearly. First, there's this unending technical need for really good, truly unpredictable randomness, that high-quality entropy, to feed our cryptographic systems and keep them ahead of attackers whose capabilities are always increasing.
That's the foundational mathematical challenge.
Right. And second, there's the modern, almost overwhelming structural challenge. Managing and controlling the sheer volume and flow of information in our hyper-connected world. That flood of data, its accumulation and movement, has itself become maybe the primary vector for risk and attack.
So encryption is necessary, absolutely essential, but it's not sufficient. Controlling the flow, setting boundaries, monitoring access, that's the other half of the equation, maybe even the harder half now.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
Which leads us to a really difficult closing thought, a societal one. It's the collective action problem. Most of our critical digital infrastructure, the networks that run everything, are owned and operated by private companies. But the harm from a major cyber attack, say, taking down the power grid, disrupting financial systems, that harm falls on everyone, on society as a whole.
So there's a mismatch between private ownership and public consequence, leading to calls for more government involvement in defense.
Exactly. But that raises incredibly thorny questions. If effective defense requires, as some in Washington argue, visibility into all the networks, government sensors deep inside private infrastructure, well, where does that leave privacy?
Are we just swapping the risk of corporate surveillance, that one-way mirror you mentioned, for state surveillance?
That's the fundamental tension, the dilemma you as a citizen, as a consumer, have to wrestle with. How do we achieve the collective security we need against sophisticated threats, while preserving individual liberty and privacy, especially when the very technologies potentially needed for defense are often designed for pervasive monitoring, operating largely outside our awareness or consent? Finding that balance, that's maybe the biggest unsolved problem in our digital age.